President Trump's animosity towards late Senator John McCain appears to have resurfaced. The White House apparently asked the Navy to move the USS John McCain out of sight during the president's recent visit to Japan. The warship is named after the late senator's father and grandfather. And at one point, the ship's name was covered with a tarp. But the Navy says it was not obscured when the president arrived. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan has responded.
I never authorized or never approved any action around the movement or activity regarding that ship. And furthermore, I would never dishonor the memory of a great American patriot like Senator McCain.
Well, on Twitter and in front of cameras this morning, the president denied knowing anything about the request, but the president went on to say that whoever did it was well-meaning. So joining us now for more on this and from the Pentagon is CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. David, I know you've been in contact with the Pentagon and with the Navy. There's been a lot of confusion around this story. What are your sources telling you about exactly what happened?
It's clear that there was a request from the White House Military Office, which is the military unit over at the White House, which coordinates the president's overseas travel, to the Indo-Pacific Command, which is based in Hawaii, to keep the McCain out of sight during the president's speech on the USS Wasp on last Tuesday, which would have been Monday in the United States, Memorial Day. Now, that request was then forwarded down the chain of command to the 7th Fleet, which is headquartered in Yokosuka, Japan, where the president was giving the speech. And I'm told that it was the commander of the 7th Fleet, Admiral William Sawyer, who put an end to that idea. And the Navy insists that there was nothing about the John McCain that was covered up during the time that the president was there, and that a tarp that had been over the ship's name was removed, and that a barge that had been alongside used for painting had been moved. And so had the president looked in the right direction, he could have seen the USS McCain. There is another question here, which is whether sailors from the USS McCain were prohibited from attending the president's speech. When the president gives a speech like that at a military base, all the units are tasked to provide a certain number of soldiers or sailors so that there's a full house when the president speaks. And on this day, two destroyers, two U.S. destroyers at Yokosuka, the sailors were given the day off, meaning they didn't have to go to the president's speech. And one of those destroyers that was given the day off was the USS McCain. Now, was that a deliberate following up on this directive? It's not clear. There are also reports that some sailors from the USS McCain attempted to attend the speech in any event, and showed up wearing their John McCain ball caps, and were turned away. Now, were they turned away because they were wearing McCain ball caps, or were they turned away because there were already a full crowd there? We don't know. This is all stuff that the Pentagon is trying very hard to figure out, because the Secretary of Defense was clearly blindsided by all of this, and he's in Singapore right now attending a conference, and he wants to know exactly what happened, and he should be able to find out in quick order, because another person attending that same conference is the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command.
So, you know, the president tweeted pretty soon after the story
last night
broke, saying that he had nothing to do with it. And then he was asked about it this morning. I want to play some of the sound. Here's what he had to say.
John McCain, I wasn't a fan, but I would never do a thing like that. Now, somebody did it because they thought I didn't like him, okay? And they were well-meaning, I will say. I didn't know anything about it. I would never have done that.
So you found out through your sources that indeed there was an email sent out, but do we know sort of at what level this was? The president said he didn't know anything about it. There are a lot of people that work for the administration, from interns all the way up. So do we have any
And
idea
the SecDef says he knew nothing
who
about
may
it.
have sent this?
No, it's an action officer level. I mean, in the Navy, that could be a lieutenant commander or a commander. So it's fairly low ranking, but at some point, it appears when it got down to the commander of the 7th Fleet, who would have been fairly directly involved in all the preparations for the president's visit to Yokosuka, then that detail started to come up the chain of command again, and I think that's when somebody said, we can't do this. The president said whoever did this was well-meaning. I think if you talk to any military person, certainly the ones I've talked to, they would not call this well-meaning. They would call it, at best, misguided and disrespectful, and at worst, dragging the military into the politics of President Trump versus the memory of John McCain.
And David, let's set aside the politics of this and talk about the ship, the USS John McCain, and who was named for. Maybe our audience may not remember or be aware that it wasn't initially named for the late Senator John McCain. It was named for his grandfather, who was head of what is now called United States Indo-Pacific Command, as was his father, who was head of SINCPAC when he was in the military at the time of the Vietnam War. So there were two namesakes, John McCain the first, John McCain the second, and ultimately the senator's name was added.
McCain, of course, is a household word in America because of what the last John McCain did with his political career, ran for president. But McCain is a household word in the Navy because of the fact that both his grandfather and his father were the commanders in the Pacific and were characters in their own right, and when I first started covering the Pentagon, some of the first things you'd hear would be stories about the McCains in Pearl Harbor. So this is as iconic a name as there is in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah,
right.
It really is, and it's just, you know, as you point out, David, a lot of people, including Senator McCain's daughter, have been very vocal about what has transpired over the last couple of days with regards to this story.
Right.
But we're really happy you were able to shed some light on it through your reporting.
Thanks, David.
Sure thing.